We should start tonight with all the exciting announcements from Google I.O.
So tonight is an interesting and peculiar night. I'm looking at the follow-up section of our show notes, and there's only one entry. So, listeners, look at the timestamp on your podcast player of choice right now, and we'll see how long this one follow-up entry lasts, because in theory it should be quick. Calamity Jan was the first of many to write in and point out the error in our ways in the last episode. When Syracuse had us do that quiz, I don't remember if John pitched it to us improperly, if we interpreted it wrong after John pitched it to us, but one way or another, we as a collective unit screwed it up. And the way the quiz was actually written is that it was not it's not if the companies could disappear, it was that if we couldn't use them anymore. So we couldn't use Google, but the rest of the planet is still YouTube and like it's their job. And we totally screwed that up, and several people have written to us. And I don't know that we necessarily need to redo the quiz all over again, but it certainly would make me think long and hard about my answers. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think what we did was an interesting question, but it was not what was asked. And by the way, since having just recently listened to the episode, what happened was that we all correctly read what the quiz was about, but then immediately forgot about it and did something different.
Wait, you listened to the show?
Yeah, I always listen to the show.
So you can hear my edits?
What do you think? It's a secret. It's not a secretly published show. Other people can get it. It's like, it's there. Anyone can download it.
Nah, this might change some things.
How is this news to you? How is this news?
Yeah,
know
John's
I listen
been
to
doing
all
this
of the podcasts that I'm on.
In any case, so how would I change things? Although I don't feel like I'm reliant on YouTube, I think I did not appropriately weigh access to YouTube. So I think Google may have risen a little bit. I don't think I would change my opinion of like Instagram, although, man, do I love Instagram. I was thinking about that earlier today. Instagram always makes me happy. You know what sometimes makes me happy? Twitter. You know what I'm totally addicted to? Twitter. But you know what always makes me happy? Instagram. Anyway, I don't know. I don't think I would change Microsoft. Oh, that's the other thing. Like AWS just disappearing, that would be tough because half the darn internet runs on AWS. So that would be very tough. But in broad strokes, I don't think my answers would be too different.
Well, the difference is that it means our whole discussion of like, oh, well, if we got rid of that, something else would come along to replace it. That's not true if the service remains and we are just choosing not to use it. So if we just choose not to use Instagram, don't hold your breath for an Instagram replacement to come along. Same thing. We just don't use YouTube. It's not like a YouTube competitor suddenly going to spring up because we're not using it, right? So that makes it. I think that changes my opinion a little bit about sort of my faith that if I get rid of Facebook, an Instagram replacement will come along. I still think I would ditch Facebook first, but I would feel worse about it because I do use Instagram, and knowing that I couldn't use it and that there's not going to be an alternative would make that decision harder. And Amazon, kind of similar. If I don't use Amazon, but everyone else still gets to use it, and you're waiting for something to come and replace Amazon, it's not going to come along anytime soon. Yeah, I think my rankings would probably stay the same, but I think I'd feel worse about all of them.
Wow, we did well. That was like 5 minutes. I don't even know what to do with this. This is a weird night. I don't know if I can even handle the rest of the show. So how does this work? Do we just immediately move on to topics? Is that what happens?
I guess.
I'm so confused.
It feels wrong somehow.
I'm just thinking about it like when we have the follow-up list shows?
Yeah.
WWDC ones always have no follow-up. Our one interview show had no follow-up. When that happens, we seem to handle it. So I feel like we're prepared for this.
All right, so let's move on.
We are sponsored this week by Betterment, investing made better. Go to betterment.com/ATP to learn more. Betterment is a smarter way to invest your money, providing investing advice through smart technology, automated investing, and human advisors all together. Betterment has changed the industry by using the same strategies that financial advisors use with clients who have millions of dollars, but now making them available to everyone, including smart rebalancing, global diversification, tax-efficient strategies, and much more. Betterment's mission is to help you manage and grow your investments, to build your financial future, and keeping the fees very low along the way, because you lose less money over time. Because if you do the math, typical investment fees and costs can really add up to big, scary numbers over time, it kind of makes you wonder what you're paying for. And Betterment's fees are a fraction of the cost of other financial services. So you save more of that money over time. And Betterment is so easy to use, they've won awards for their customer experience. For a limited time, you can even sign up for Betterment, and you may qualify for a free Canary home security system to help secure your home. Terms and conditions do apply, and investing involves risk. To learn more, visit betterment.com/ATP. That's betterment.com/ATP. Betterment, investing made better.
Marco dropped some knowledge on the internet this week and talked about how MP3 is or isn't dead. And I don't know, I can summarize this if you'd like, Marco, or since you're here, maybe it would be better if you just kind of talk us through this.
Yeah, so basically the Fraunhofer Institute for Science, I think. It's a big...
I love their chocolate chip cookies.
Yes, it's a big German research I don't know, organization. I don't honestly know that much about it, but they invent a lot of technological compression formats and signal processing things and everything, and then they patent them. And one of the things they invented was, I think, most or all of the MP3 format, of MP3 audio compression. The MP3 patents have all expired. The last one expired in mid-April, so a few weeks ago. Until then, they were running an MP3 licensing program where if you made any kind of MP3 hardware or software, you had to pay them for a license to the patents. And they also would sell you reference implementations of MP3 encoder and decoder if you wanted them for an additional fee. Basically, what happened was when the patent expired, about a week later, in late April, Fraunhofer published an updated announcement to their site, basically saying, we are terminating the license program for MP3. We will no longer license MP3 technology. Pretty much everyone has moved on to AAC, and all of you should too. And this was picked up by a lot of low-value news sites around the tech sphere as an announcement by the MP3 creator that the MP3 is dead and that we should all it's time to move on. It's time to move on to AAC. The reality, of course, is all that patent stuff, and this actually means, they had to terminate the license program because there were no more patents left to license, and I'm guessing they decided at that point, well, why even bother licensing our encoder software since it doesn't have that many users, and if we're not going to make any more money from the patents, that's where the big money is, so why even bother administering this program at all? That's my guess of their logic here.
I'm kind of surprised they didn't continue the program anyway, just as a bluff, because there's so many people who will just sign up for it anyway, because they'll just have heard that's the thing you have to do, and it'll be years before word of mouth gets around among people who are not clued in that you don't have to license anything from them. You can just use it. Yeah.
So anyway, the real story here is that MP3 is now patent free. It was patent free in Europe, I think, since 2012. Wikipedia has a whole list of all the things and when they expired and everything. And it is now patent free in the U.S. And to the best of my knowledge, it is effectively patent free or totally patent free worldwide now. And so this means that there have been a couple of little irritating things that we've had to do over the years to work around MP3 being patented, we as computing users or as software developers. So, for example, open source OSs and projects like browsers, like Firefox, open source things would almost never support MP3 or would require you to do some kind of weird jumping through hoops like, all right, go download the lame MP3 encoder, which is an open source encoder, go download that and get the compiled binary library for it and place it in this directory. We won't distribute the MP3 code because that would be breaking this patent. But if you have this encoder on your own, you can put it in this location and we will support MP3s in our software. And that was done by things like the Audacity free open source audio editor. I think does Handbrake ever do that? It might have. I forget. But basically, open source tools that would support MP3 in some way would have to usually do things like that. There was also a debate back when the HTML5 audio and video tags started coming out, and there was a debate about codec support, about what audio and video formats would the browsers all support. And there was this big debate when Firefox announced that they would only support free open source things, which at the time was only Ogg Vorbis for audio and Ogg Theora for video, I think. I don't think there's any other ones. And the problem with the Vorbis and Theora formats is that they're just not very widely supported. But Firefox, being an open source project, said, well, that's, we can't support the patented ones because of open source and we don't believe in it and everything else. There's lots of practical reasons why patented stuff is a problem in open source projects. So basically it was this big problem that we always had to keep jumping around like, well, if we want this to play, we have to encode this file in two different formats, use MP3 for everybody else, or use AAC maybe, and then also use Ogg or WebM or whatever else for the open source / open standards friendly holdouts. It was just a big annoyance, a big tax on everything. It just made everything more complicated and suck because that's what patents do. And so this is great because for the first time ever, we now have an audio format that is supported everywhere by everything. I mean, MP3, like I wrote in my post that it's the most widely supported audio format of all time, and I really do think that's true. One reader, and I figured this would come up, emailed me, "Hi, Chris Pepper," to say, what about Wave /AIF? I thought of that when I wrote that sentence. I think Wave is actually less widely supported than MP3. If you look at like all the hardware and software that's out there, all the little audio players, car audio players, like home stereo deck things, like so many things can play MP3 files off of either a memory card or a USB stick or a CD, full of files, that I bet there's a good number of those things that will ignore a .wav file, but will play an MP3 file.
I think you mean WAV, right?
Oh my God.
I was going to say the same thing. You beat me to it.
Nice. Anyway, so I really do think MP3 is the most widely supported audio format of all time, and it's now patent free. Now, the story from a lot of the stories that talked about this said we should all move to AAC because it's better, it's more efficient, and MP3 is lower quality and everything else. And that is technically true. AAC is better. There are a couple of flaws in MP3 that very, very well-trained people are able to reliably hear. Allegedly. I don't know, I've never met one, but they claim to exist, and I for the purpose of this discussion, I'll believe that they exist. This is all true, but most of the benefits of AAC are at very low bit rates. Things like below like 64K or below 48K, where you're trying to get acceptable quality at an extremely low bit rate. It's not going to sound great, but you want it to sound okay at like 32K or something like that. This is not what people are using for music, and it's not even what people are using for podcasts anymore, because the standards for podcasts have gone up. People now expect podcasts to sound effectively perfect, or at least very professional. And so, nobody wants super highly compressed voice stuff in distribution of podcasts or music. And so the advantages of AAC, while they exist, and there are newer formats as well, things like the Vorbis Opus format. Sorry, the Opus format is it's basically the new hotness from the people who made Ogg Vorbis, and they're super smart over there. Anyway, so there are newer formats like that improve low bitrate quality. But once you get to about 128K or higher, the differences between these formats are really small. And none of them can really represent music like transparently well enough for most people at bit rates below that. So it's not like you're gonna have your music collection, which is currently probably 256K on average. You're not going to have that suddenly be encoded into like a 128K AAC and think that's okay, or a 64K Opus file. Like it's going to sound worse, and it's going to be amazing for the size, but it's still not going to be as good. So basically, there's not a lot of reason to dump MP3 as a format. Now, that being said, if you're acquiring new music, if you're buying from iTunes, if anybody still does this anymore, buying from iTunes or anything else, sure, buy AAC because it is better in that context. But basically, if you already have MP3s, there's no reason to put any effort into like replacing them or upgrading them to AAC or anything else. And if you are choosing a format to distribute files in, like what podcasters have to do, or just to encode your music in, it's not that different, basically, is what I'm saying. And AAC is still patented. And I honestly should have, but didn't look up for how much longer AAC is still patented. I think it's a while because MP3 is really old, and AAC is only kind of old. So I think it wouldn't surprise me if it's another 10 years. Like there might have been that big of a space between them. Basically, AAC is good, and in some ways it is better, but it is still patented, and it's not better enough for that to be a big issue for most people who are considering using MP3. And MP3 is still more widely supported. AAC, it's kind of like the year of desktop Linux. AAC is always about to be supported everywhere. It's always like on the horizon. Oh, next year or in the next few years, everything will support AAC. And that just never comes. And we are really close. Lots of stuff does support AAC. But when you go into the more edge cases, like I was saying earlier, things like car stereos and stuff like that, the support for AAC is much more spotty, and everything supports MP3. So when you're distributing files, like podcasters, for instance, MP3 is still the safest choice. And I actually ran some numbers to see if I was just nuts. And I probably am nuts, but maybe not for this reason. In Overcast's entire database, this is every feed I know about, every feed anybody has ever searched for, every feed anybody has ever added. I crawl all of these feeds. I have a database that has 50 million episodes in it from over 500,000 podcasts. The entire database was, I think I said 92% of them reported themselves as MP3s. 99% of the top 500 were MP3. So basically all podcasts use it. Like there are some holdouts that use AAC, but very, very few. The vast majority use MP3 for this reason, basically, that if you're going to distribute a file that you're only going to make one file for most of these contexts. So you might as well distribute the one that can play on by far the most devices, and that's MP3. So basically, going back to the original point, MP3 was declared dead, but it's very much not dead in a lot of areas. And in fact, I would now say that if you're debating which audio format to use for almost anything, MP3 should be very high in your list, and is probably the right choice because it is pretty efficient, not as efficient at the low bit rates as the newer ones, but close relative to like a WAV file, supported by everything, and now totally patent-free to encode and decode and distribute. You can do anything with MP3 now. It's totally patent-free. There's lots of great software that supports it. There's lots of great tooling around creating and editing MP3s. So basically, I don't see it as an argument of like, you got to justify using this old format. I see it as an argument of these new formats have to justify to me why I should give up the freedom that MP3 now has and the widespread support that it has.
I don't understand how this MP3 is dead thing even got started. Was it just one really dumb website that people picked up on because it was so easy to show how dumb they were? Or did multiple people report it? It's so nonsensical. Like the obvious story is MP3 is finally free. It's like MP3's birth. It's not its death, it's its birth. Like finally you can use it without having to worry about any of the crap. We wanted it for a long time. It's been annoying us for a while, and now it's open to everybody. Like that's the obvious story to make out of this, regardless of what someone's press release does. But the fact that it got picked up so much and passed around with the dead thing, even if it was just a bunch of articles refuting the fact that it was dead, is disappointing, or like some amazing PR triumph by somebody who's like, let's see if I can convince the world that when MP3 is finally free for everybody, we'll call it dead.
Yeah, I think it's just a really tempting tech headline to proclaim things dead that either are or were once popular. This is dead, or this is the X killer. And in tech, that doesn't usually happen. Very few things in tech ever really get killed or die. Usually they just kind of fade more into obscurity, or they lose the dominant market share they once had, but they still continue to be used or to exist.
Yeah, the things that do die don't get stories declaring their death. They just get fewer and fewer stories progressively, and then they get a retrospective. Just think of RIM as RIM slowly died. I think I said on an old Hypercritical episode when I was going through things, it was like WebOS dead, RIM dead soon. right? But no one even cares enough to complain about that. And the way it dies is you just see fewer and fewer stories about it, and then you wait 3 years, and someone posts a story about, hey, I never remember RIM. Like it becomes a nostalgia story, but it's not worth talking about while it is actually dying. That's what death means. No one wants to talk about you anymore.
Yeah, and and there are lots of places where MP3 either was never used or is no longer used, and these new codecs are used. Like, for example, if you're making a streaming service and you want to offer moderate quality at a cellular-friendly bit rate, and you want to save money on your bandwidth costs, it makes total sense for you to send like a 128K AAC or something even better, like Opus, because you're going to get more quality out of those bits than MP3, and you're not going to have to worry about support because it's only going to your app. So it's like from your servers to your app, you can use whatever you want. If there's going to be patent issues, you're probably going to have to pay a license fee for that. And I heard, I haven't verified this, I heard Spotify actually uses Vorbis so that they don't have to pay the patent licensing fees to anybody, which is interesting if true. But again, it doesn't, like, the fact that very little hardware and software supports Vorbis out there, for Spotify, they don't care. All they need to support it is their app, which they control, and their servers, which they also control. So for them, it's a no-brainer. So anyway, this is great news that we finally have, this awesome everything everywhere format that is patent free. And so many little barriers in technology now no longer need to be there. And I don't expect this to like revolutionize the world or anything. I mean, heck, there aren't that many people encoding their own audio files anymore to begin with the exception of content producers. and most of them are not doing it directly anyway. They're doing it through like software or services that supports multiple things and everything else. But for the people who do still work on audio files and who do still distribute files to be played, like every podcaster, this is a big deal. And it's not going to be noticed by a lot of people, but it does greatly improve things in a lot of ways that it might take a few years for them to be deployed, maybe, like as software slowly drops restrictions on MP3. Maybe Apple builds in MP3 encoding support to the core audio APIs, which they've never had it. They've only ever had AAC encoding because Apple pays a license to use the AAC patents. But they never wanted to also pay one for MP3, except in their Pro Tools, which they sell separately anyway. So just things like that. Like now, maybe you'll be able to encode MP3s from all the system apps in the next Mac OS. And maybe an iOS might get that support too now. Now, lots of people, myself included, can ship apps that make or use MP3s in some way without worrying about getting hit by massive patent fees or lawsuits or worse.
So 2 quick pieces of real-time follow-up. First of all, in the arena in the chat gives us a link to what bitrate does Spotify use for streaming? This is on Spotify's website. Spotify uses 3 quality ratings for streaming, all in the OGG Vorbis format, 96K, 160K, or 320K, which is only for premium subscribers. So I believe that's what you said, Marco, and your theory is correct. Additionally, you said a moment ago that, it seems to your recollection that only paid apps support MP3, but you can actually encode something as an MP3 in iTunes, and that's effectively a system app. So
that's true. I forgot about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I used to do that all the time back when I used iTunes. Well, really, ever.
Yeah, but it was never in the QuickTime APIs that everything else used.
Sure.
And it is not available in the low-level core audio stuff either.
That I didn't know, but either way, it doesn't make your point wrong, but it's just an interesting counterpoint.
You can decode MP3, but you can't encode it.
I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, but you're right. You're right. iTunes does include that, and I forgot about iTunes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to save you 1,000 well-actuallys. So instead, I well-actually'd you. That's okay, though. Anyway, no, this is fascinating, and this really is the happiest possible ending to MP3, right? Which is to say, it's a brand new beginning, or it's nothing else, a continuation, and that's really fantastic. That this format that is not perfect, but is pretty darn good. That, to your point, freaking everyone knows how to read. That it's pretty much unencumbered at this point, which is fantastic.
I keep wondering if we're going to get into a similar, but perhaps even worse, much worse situation with video. Like with audio, I think it's fine because, like Marco said, like MP3 does the job, and it does it in a reasonable way. And the ones that are better are not that much better, and all of them are kind of within the limits of normal person human hearing. Like you don't you don't care about the quality. Like only super duper audiophiles even care about the bit rate, and most normal people like it's just fine, right? But for video, H.264 is the most popular sort of proprietary one that's out there now. Similar thing, with the WebM and everything, and web browsers don't want to include H.264 support. In some cases, the free open ones aren't even as good as H.264, but H.264 has been around for a long time. There's a lot of hardware that knows how to decode it, but whether dedicated hardware or hardware designed to be good at decoding it in a low power way in our phones and in other sorts of devices, and dedicated chips for like embedded things. And it takes a long time for that support to come up. Kind of similar to the way Apple was kind of gung-ho about how awesome their AAC decoders were, encoders and decoders. And, I bet even today, it wouldn't surprise me if an iPhone is more energy efficient when decoding AAC files than when decoding MP3 files, just because it's Apple's preferred format and they sell stuff in that format and stuff like that.
Well, there used to be in older generations of iOS hardware, there used to be hardware encoders and decoders for AAC and I think maybe even H.264, but at least for AAC. And as far as I know, in all of the recent hardware, and not even that recent, there's no longer hardware encoders because the CPUs just got so fast. I mean, I use AAC encoding in Overcast for the watch transfers, because I mentioned I transcode the files to lower bit rates to save transfer time to make them super small. It reads the MP3 or whatever the source file is and encodes a new AAC at like 110x on an iPhone 7, like 110 times as quickly as playback on an iPhone 7, which is incredibly fast. So that is using these software-only decoders, because the hardware ones, they used to have lots of problems where like only one thing could use it at once. If your app was backgrounded, it would not necessarily be guaranteed to be there, and it was really weird. So and I actually encode things in parallel because every modern iPhone is dual core. So, and you couldn't do that with the hardware encoder either. Only one thing could be using it. So anyway, all this is to say that the software, basically everything's done in software now, and it's so fast it doesn't even matter between the formats. But there was a time when you were correct.
Well, so no, there's still hardware support. Like I said, even if it's not a literal dedicated separate little area on the dive with a hardware H.264 encoder or decoder or both, the hardware in these chips in many ways is designed around these particular difficult problems, whether it's encryption for SSL or for, just basically all kinds of encryption, like the SIMD instruction sets and specific instructions that are going to be in a linchpin or a critical path along particular algorithms. So it's not dedicated hardware just for this purpose, but it is hardware designed around a set of problems that they know the things they need to solve. And like, even if it's just, again, adding a special instruction, it's more energy efficient to do that than to sort of manually implement that special instruction by a series of other instructions. And they test these things to say, this needs to be low power, not use a lot of power when showing H.264 video. If you're going to do that with a dedicated H.264 decoder on a system on a chip on the iPhone 3G, fine. If by the time the iPhone 7 comes along, you can get that same job done with less die area by using special instructions in the extended instruction set of the new ARM whatever thing, or using your GPU or like a shader on the GPU to do it, or whatever the hell, that's fine too. But this is a known problem set. And I don't think for the formats I don't think they're doing that same test for WebM. In other words, like maybe the hardware is just as good for WebM, but it's not an important use case for them, because as far as Apple's concerned, H.264 video is kind of the standard for the stuff that they're expecting you to play on iOS devices. To the degree I don't even know what kind of support there is for any other kind of video playback on iOS devices if it's not H.264.
Yeah, I should clarify too, my statement earlier about there being no more hardware stuff, I was only talking about audio. Video, I don't know. I'm guessing there probably still is hardware acceleration for video, just because it's so much more complicated. And I think you might be right that it might be at the GPU level instead, but we'll see.
Yeah, I know these system on chips are big and complicated, but the point is, like, that's the use case. And like I said, H.264 is the proprietary one. It's the one that is patent encumbered, that would be annoying for people to use, that is very widely supported, but only because, like, this big industry effort to get everyone to pay these patent fees, and just like, and it's part of the MPEG consortium, and historically they have had good success getting their standards implemented in everything from DVDs to Blu-rays to, the iTunes Music Store and YouTube and everything, right? Now, I don't know when the patents run out in H.264, probably a long time from now, but H.265 is already here. And H.265 is better than H.264 in a more significant way than AAC is better than an MP3 in terms of how small the files can be and at a very high quality. And like H.265 is essentially required for reasonable streaming 4K video over connections that are not massively bigger than they were before, so on and so forth. H.265 support in hardware and the decoders and everything is not great right now, which if you ever encountered some H.265 hardware and try to play it on like your dinky little Mac laptop that had no problem playing giant full screen H.264 files, and all of a sudden the fans are spinning up, and you're like, why the hell are the fans spinning up? This is just 1080 video. Oh, it's H.265, and my computer doesn't know what the hell to do with that, and so it's doing it the slow way with a plain old algorithm running on, no special purpose hardware, instructions not tuned to and a decoder not tuned to my specific system. Like, it's not like Apple has, I don't know, maybe they have, but as far as I'm aware, Apple has not written the hand-tuned, perfectly designed for Mac hardware H.265 decoder, let alone having dedicated H.265 decoders in your old Mac laptop. Again, maybe it's in new ones. And there's a bunch of DRM crap in there, I'm sure, too.
That's basically what Kaby Lake is for. Kaby Lake is basically to add like H.265 support in various places and also lots of DRM for 4K.
And the HDCP crap.
Yeah,
I know. All right, so this long road for me to get to this analogy. Say H.264, its patents run out, and we're like, yay, this video format that's massively popular, that has wide support. Again, like every phone can view H.264 video in an energy efficient way, and it's supported in all sorts of set-top boxes, and is very popular, and right, that becomes patent free. They like, I wouldn't want to be stuck with that. What I want to happen is the industry to move on to a format that is better than H.264. Now, maybe that's H.265, which has all the same downsides of being proprietary and having all these patents associated with it, but it is better enough that I'm saying, like, I want that. I don't want to be stuck with H.264 for the next 20 years, right? That seems like a bad scenario, whereas I'm okay to be, quote unquote, stuck with MP3s. I think it's fine, but H.265 is a big step up. And if there is a free and open source alternative, like the next version, whatever, not VP9 is the next thing, but whatever the sibling open equivalent of H.265 is, ideally we would move to that. But the problem with those other ones, which you didn't mention, but it came up with the whole Aug Theora thing and everything. It's like, oh, these are free and open, and there's no patent licensing. People get a little scared for maybe it's just FUD or it's founded in some reality, that just because the thing is free and open doesn't mean that someone will find that it actually infringes on some patents anyway, right? And so the creators say, here, it's for you to use, and you can use it and don't have to pay me anything. But if it became widely used, it could be that a bunch of people with a bunch of super dumb patents come wandering by and say, oh, the whole world is using this Aug Theora format. Well, it turns out Aug Theora violated, infringes on my patent on ones because it uses both ones and zeros. And so now I'm going to collect money from everybody who has Aug Theora support, and it's spread over the whole industry, so I'm going to be rich. And so people worry about that. And in some ways, the format backed by some giant consortium of companies, like basically if all the companies that would sue you with their super dumb patents, or all the companies that could support a lawsuit against them from people with even dumber patents, it's safer to buy from them to say, well, I'll license your patents and I'm legally covered, and if someone decides to sue, they're going to sue you, and you're a consortium of all these rich companies and you can handle it yourself or whatever. So I think it's one of the things that also keeps people away from the open formats, is the fear that maybe they're not as open as they think they are, because lots of patents are out there and lots of patents are really dumb.
Exactly, like, because they haven't really been challenged. Like they are not usually used widely enough for any submarine patents to actually surface.
Yeah, they want to wait till it becomes popular and then collect the money. So they're not, even if someone knows, oh, that totally infringes on my patent, they're not going to challenge it now when nobody uses it, because you can't get blood from a stone, right? They would just like, go ahead, spread that everywhere, and then I'll attack and get all the money. So anyway, all this is to say is that I hope. It's kind of weird to hope this, but I kind of hope that the video industry at least, does not settle down and say, once H.264 is free of all of its patents, we'll just settle down into an H.264 only future, and we'll all have royalty free, beautiful video everywhere. Because I think video still needs to improve, and things like color depth and frame rate and, resolution and size and, HDR and all sorts of those areas that I think are perceptible to regular people and important, especially if internet bandwidth doesn't improve at the same rate as our demand for all those neat things that I just listed, which I think it's not in the US anyway. I basically hope we move to H.265, and I hope hardware support for H.265 comes, and I hope it doesn't make the fans on my Mac spin up anymore, and I hope we leave H.264 behind, but all that really does is reset the patent clock. So maybe when H.265 patents run out when we're all 87 years old, then we can say this is good enough for human eyes, and it's fine for 2D video, but by then we'll be arguing about proprietary patent encumbered things for VR or whatever. So
probably in about 5 years, I think we might be allowed to use DivX patent free.
Oh man, I haven't heard that in forever. God, that was so amazing when it first came out. Holy crap. I remember thinking this looks phenomenal.
It did at the time, and I love it. It was just like a stolen MPEG-4 codec, basically. Like that's all. It's just MPEG-4. And but before H.264, like the first version of MPEG-4, that's what DivX was.
It was also that terrible disk format where you would get the disk and then I would have to destroy it or something. The disks would self-destruct or some terrible thing.
It was like a rental thing, but like the disks would like it just had like an expiration on the DRM, and it would like check in with the service, I guess, to activate or deactivate. And so like you would like quote rent a movie, and then a few days later it would stop playing, so you just have to throw it away. Yeah. Surprisingly, consumers were not that into that.
What a great idea. Wasn't it like Best Buy or something that was back in
It was Circuit City.
Yep.
Circuit City. Even worse.
There you go.
Which, by the way, fun fact, Circuit City used to have its headquarters, guess where? Richmond, Virginia.
That's quite something to brag about. Congratulations.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And CarMax is still here, though. CarMax was spun off of Circuit City. They're still around. Anyway, any other thoughts about file formats, MP3s, etc.? I'm pretty amped to see if this changes things for the better. And I think it will in some minor ways. We'll see if it really makes any empirical difference in major ways. But for nerds like us that occasionally encode things, I think it'll be a lot better.
Well, and the reality is, like, the problems that John is citing with video formats, which are very real problems. And, like, we're lucky in the audio world that audio is not necessarily a solved problem, but it's a lot closer to, it's solved well enough for the most part with MP3, which is like a 25-year-old format. Like we've basically solved this problem.
But the bandwidth of ears is so much less than the bandwidth of eyes, and ears are so much better, more tractable as sort of simple sensing machines than eyeballs and the perception of vision is, which is way more complicated. And so, once we have a format that fits over our wires with the bandwidth most people have, that it sounds as good as any normal person can hear, you're more or less done, plus or minus like dynamic range and like, multi sound field crap and stereo imaging and stuff like that. But that's why we get to the limits of sound sooner. And vision is going to be a while, because even when you've exhausted all the 2D things, then you have like, well, what about actual depth perception and being able to focus on the background and the foreground? And then you're like, oh no, you gotta start all over, and the bandwidth gets even worse.
Right. And like, and so, not only have we reached the limits of what people can hear, but like, even if you try to go, like, video is going to have higher density resolutions and stuff, or higher, bit rates or higher bit depths for things like HDR for a while to come. We're not at the limit of our vision yet, as you said, but audio, like CD audio, 44K, back in whenever that was introduced, like the mid 80s, that's basically as good as it gets for our ears. And there's lots of people who say, oh, I can hear up to, 24, 192 or whatever. And if they think they can, good for them.
We have the bandwidth of that too. It's not a problem. It's like,
and that's exactly the thing. Like with audio, we're talking about such smaller files that if you care that much about the quality of them, you can just get lossless. And the file sizes are not that prohibitive in modern technology. Like, you can get a massive hard drive from Amazon for like $100 that can hold as much audio as you're likely to have ever, even if you store it losslessly. So like, it's not really like, we don't really need so badly to move on to better and better audio compression standards every 5 years like we do with video, because the need just isn't there. Like, we're already pretty good.
Well, we accept the size hit, because I remember every time I rip one of my Blu-rays and I decide to put like one of my anime Blu-rays and I put multiple languages on it, those 5.1 tracks for, DTS HD, the size of that stuff adds up. Pretty soon, the vast majority of the data in this file that I'm ripping is audio. So even though they are small, If it's 2 hours of audio and it's, 6 channels and multiplied by 3 languages, suddenly you're talking some real bytes.
Yeah, but I would say that's not a major case. Anyway, and also, it's the whole patent issue is, I think, more of a problem in many ways in audio, and I guess not anymore, but it was more of a problem in audio because the world of audio distribution, especially in the form of podcasts, which is close to my heart, obviously, is decentralized, and so you don't have to worry. Like, if you produce video, you produce one thing, and you in whatever format you want, and you upload it to YouTube, and then YouTube worries about what format it serves, and all it has to serve is what its own website and apps and various integration deals can play. So YouTube can buy like one giant license for these formats and basically be done with it. And video creators aren't needing to like worry about that themselves or making a whole bunch of other services because the world of video is so concentrated in this very small number of proprietary places. YouTube, Facebook, that's basically it. But audio is different. Audio didn't get that centralized for the most part, and so the formats and the patents around them and the support still matters. Like, if you're going to embed a video on a web page, you're probably not going to have to encode the files yourself and put them on your server. You're probably going to embed a YouTube embed, and you don't have to worry about any of this stuff. But you can plausibly, and people often do, embed audio files on their page that like direct served audio files from your own hosting. And then you do have to worry about encoding, and you do have to figure out these formats and players and things like that. Like, in more proprietary worlds, like what video is, like what you were saying earlier about, big companies like to license the other major formats, this is less of a problem in practice for the producers. But in audio, because it's so open and decentralized and way simpler, it actually matters. So that's why, it's another reason why the video formats being patented probably forever, practically speaking, is I think less of an issue in practice, or rather it's less avoidable in practice than the freedom that we now have with MP3 and the need for that in the first place in audio.
The only other thing that occurs to me is on video formats, because we don't need to know what format things are. Very often, a video codec will get embedded in a context where it will just will overstay its welcome. Arguably, DVDs kind of did that with MPEG-2. MPEG-2 is a bad compression format by modern standards. It makes files that are big that don't look that good. If you take a DVD and if you take the same source material and encode it H.264, it will embarrass the MPEG-2, as well it should, because it's an old codec, right? But for a long time, and I bet probably today still somewhere, cable television that you got over your coaxial cable, after they switched to digital cable from analog, right? Whereas a lot of those channels were using MPEG-2, which was state-of-the-art at the time that they decided to do that. And a lot of them kept using MPEG-2 for a long time, delivering you substandard video quality using more bandwidth. And to some degree, that's the cable company's problem, not your problem. What do you care, as long as you see the picture on your TV?
I think over-the-air still does that. I think over-the-air HD is still MPEG-2.
And the other thing is, the other side of the coin is like, I wish you would use more modern codecs like H.264, but very often your telco in the US anyway, provider will say, great, this lets us jam more channels into the same bandwidth. Let's massively compress these things and produce tons of artifacts. Because look how small you can make H.264, and it still looks kind of good. I remember watching Mad Men on AMC and watching the incredible banding in the background of like dark scenes.
Oh, all those dark rooms.
Yeah, and they were just, I don't know how, it's like they had discovered, it's either they had discovered H.264 and managed to jam the show down to a tiny little size, or they were still using MPEG-2 and using tons of bandwidth to give me a substandard quality image. So in those embedded contexts, I still favor advancing the codec to keep up with the times, but there's very little incentive to do that, especially if they have their own dedicated lines and they're the ones who decide how to chop up the bandwidth. I saw something else recently with terrible banding in it, and I was super angry about it because it didn't seem like, maybe it was, I don't know. I wish I could remember what it was. When I see banding like that, especially if it's in some piece of media, like if it's on like a Blu-ray that I paid a lot of money for to get like the highest quality of an image, and it's just like a bad choice in encoding or something. Down with banding.
Don't forget all the blocking, like the famous example of the HBO intro with the static.
The worst. That seems like trolling at this point, doesn't it? Like, change your logo. Come on.
We are sponsored this week by Fracture. They print your photos in vivid color directly onto glass, and it looks awesome. Visit fractureme.com/podcast, and don't forget to mention ATP in that one question survey so they know you came from us. Fracture is a photo decor company. They want to rescue your favorite images from the social media feeds and everything, where that's mostly where things go now, and then they're gone within like a day. You never see them again. Fracture wants you to get those printed directly onto glass, and they have a laser-cut rigid backing, so it's actually very lightweight because it's like glass on the front and there's backing on the back, so all you see is the glass, but it's not this giant, thick, heavy pane of glass that would rip your wall apart. All you got to do is upload your digital photos and pick a size. It's that simple. The Fracture process makes the color and contrast really pop, and the sleek, frameless design lets your photos stand out while still matching any decorating style in your house or office or whatever else. And they also make amazing gifts, because not only can you get your photos printed for yourself, but go ahead and get one of those photos printed for somebody who might care about it or whose day it might brighten. Maybe it's a photo of your kid for their grandparents or something like that. These make amazing gifts. People love them. I've given them as gifts. I have lots of them around my house. So many compliments on these Fracture prints. It's really incredible. Fracture comes with a 60-day happiness guarantee to make sure you love your order, and each Fracture is handmade in Gainesville, Florida, from U.S. source materials in a carbon-neutral factory. For more information and 10% off your first order, visit fractureme.com/podcast. And don't forget to mention ATP in the one question survey so they know you came from here. Once again, fractureme.com/podcast. Thank you very much to Fracture for sponsoring our show.
So we are coming up on WWDC time. What is it, 2 weeks away, 3 weeks away? I can't even keep it straight
Something
anymore.
like that.
And there's a couple of rumors that are starting to come out, which may or may not even relate to WWDC. But the first one is, and I'm sad, you guys, Apple is supposed to be phasing out the iPad mini, so says 9to5Mac. And truth be told, this makes me sad, but at the same time, as I've been telling the two of you guys for a while now, really, I am just waiting for the MacBook to get a refresh so I can replace my iPad mini with the MacBook. So this doesn't make me as sad as it used to, but this would be a real bummer. And my dad was really thinking about getting a new iPad mini, and I told him, well, you might as well wait to see when the new one is presumably coming out any day now. And according to Zach Hall at 9to5Mac, maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the iPad line is in the middle of a transition right now, because if you look at the prices, the new iPad, whatever they're calling the new low-end 10-inch iPad, is $329. If you leave out the mini for a moment, the next one up is $599 for the 9.7-inch iPad Pro. And for almost twice the money, I would not say you get twice the iPad. And I love the 9.7-inch iPad Pro, but that's a massive price jump for what you get for that. Not to mention the fact that if you actually use it like a pro and get either a pencil or a keyboard or something, you're adding even then a lot more to the cost. But anyway, that's that huge price hole in the middle of $329 to $600. Like, obviously, this is the beginning of some kind of move, and it's not complete yet, because that just makes no sense. Like, that is obviously, like, something else is going to change in this lineup, because that is ridiculous. Because that's not a very strong selling proposition for the 9.7 Pro to be twice as much as the next model down, and be not that different from it. I'm guessing there's another shoe to drop here. And if the mini goes away, and the mini right now, they reduced it to only the 128 gig model, right? And it's $400. Is that right?
I think that's right.
It is a significantly worse deal for what you get than the new cheap iPad. And it's, significantly old by this point, and the mini was never updated that well, with the exception of the Mini 2. That was the only time it was ever updated in line with the rest of the lineup. But otherwise, that was it. So,
yeah, to that end, to put things in perspective, Aaron got me a then brand new iPad mini for not this past Christmas of 2016, but Christmas of 2015. And if I'm not mistaken, that is effectively the brand new iPad mini you could buy today.
That's right. Yeah.
And so you're right also, by the way, that it's $128 for $400, or what you didn't mention is LTE, also at 128 gigs for $530, but that's kind of off to the side. You were correct.
Right, and they all kind of...
Right. You were correct about 128 at $400.
Yeah. And so basically, like, but by introducing the new cheap 9.7 and not touching the mini, actually reducing the amount of mini configurations you could get at the same time, I think it's plausible this rumor is correct. Regardless of whether they're going to end it or do something else, I think this is very clear, though, that they do not intend for you to buy the mini right now. Because no one's going to look at that price and say, if people were buying it before, that's worth asking. Were people still buying minis in meaningful numbers? And from most of what we've heard from various analysts and stuff, the answer is no. But if anyone was thinking about buying a mini, they would look at this lineup now and they would have serious second thoughts, because why would you? Like, I think that the new cheap 9.7 is probably better in pretty much every way except size, and maybe screen quality with the laminating method and stuff. But basically there's no reason to buy it now. And there's been lots of speculation about why the mini is not doing that well. Because, assuming that's true, assuming it's not selling very well, which I think it's. Based on what people have been able to derive from earnings and stuff like that, it does seem like that's probably the case, that it's not really selling well at all. And there's lots of reasons why that might be. I mean, we talked years ago about how the iPad in general was being squeezed on both sides by MacBooks and MacBook Airs and stuff getting smaller and better and lighter, maybe taking away some of the high end of iPad size-wise, and then phones getting bigger and even more awesome and big enough that you would often just not want to have a separate device for a tablet anymore. You would just have a phone, and that would take your tablet role close enough. And I think that the market has kind of supported this theory that indeed tablets are getting squeezed by both of those sides. And if you look at the iPad lineup, I feel like the mini is the one that is most likely to get squeezed out first, if that makes sense, like by these forces. Because if you have the bigger iPads, there's probably something you do on them or something you like about the bigger screen size or whatever else that maybe your phone can't do. The mini, though, it's still a lot bigger than even the biggest phones, but it's a smaller difference, And so I that's why I feel like it probably wasn't selling well, because most people who buy it were either looking for like basically a bigger device that's still somewhat small, which now big phones do better, or were buying it because it was the cheapest iPad, and now it isn't.
I think it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy to not update the iPad mini for 2 years and say, well, it's not selling that well. I know that's not the only reason. I think everything you said is true, especially about price, because when the mini first came out, its big selling point was like, hey, it's the cheapest way you can get into an iPad. But there is Apple always does these photos, and other people will compose them as well. Line up all of the glass and aluminum rectangles that run iOS that Apple sells, and you expect to see some kind of reasonable gradation from the smallest to the biggest. And at various points there have been weird jumps in the size of it, and if you put prices along with them too, then sort of there's weird jumps, and then like, okay, well, these ones are phones, and these ones aren't technically phones, but you can get them with LTE, but you can't make phone calls on them unless you use FaceTime audio. It's this weird differentiation. But that continuum, the plus size phones have to have hurt the mini size factor. Now, with the possible size reshuffling of this rumors of the bigger than 9.7 inch but smaller than 12 point whatever inch iPod or iPad Pro whatever, that'll be like 10.5 inch or something like that. That in other words, the quote unquote normal iPad size will get bigger, or at least the screen will get bigger, and maybe the margins will pull in again or whatever. If that happens, does that open up a big enough gap for something that is not as big as that new iPad size, but not as small as an iPhone 7 Plus? Does that open up that gap enough for them to put one in there? Because I think there are customers who want that entire range. If the spacing in the range is right, if it's not too close to the phone, if it's not too close to the next size of an iPad, and if the pricing is right, if for the smaller thing you spend less money, which is a perception that customers have, And there is some vague reality because bigger screens are slightly more expensive than smaller screens. Unfortunately for Apple, the internal guts don't get cheaper unless you give them crappier guts. And that really hurts the product. What people want, same thing the iPhone SE people want, is like, give me the best insides, just a smaller outside. And Apple's like, it's not great for us. We'd rather give you the same insides with a slightly more expensive screen and charge you $100 extra for it and call it the iPhone 7 Plus. Like they like that end of it, as opposed to shrink the screen by some percentage. You save a few bucks on the screen, but all the rest of the insides, I want them to be just as good as the iPad Pro. It's like, well, then I can't really price that. People want like to look at the rectangle and say the smaller rectangles cost less money than the bigger rectangles, but it gets totally messed up by this iPhone 7 Plus, which is super expensive, and then to go back down to a lower price for the in between the iPad, it's a difficult problem. But I think there is a place in Apple's lineup for something around the size of the Mini. But it totally could be that this particular Mini is the wrong size in the new lineup. And obviously, it's currently the wrong price. So we'll see how this shakes out. But if it disappears for a while and like makes a comeback as like an 8-inch iPad or something in a few years when they're filling in the gaps, I won't be super surprised at that. Because we learned anything from the big phone thing is that different people have different size holes in their life to put rectangles with screens, whether it is your pocket or your purse or your backpack or your end table or your nightstand or whatever. We all find the size of the device that fits into our lives, or whatever. Maybe it's just like the first one you got and you get used to it and you build your habits around it. And if the Mini goes away entirely, I bet there's a bunch of people still running around with Minis who won't be enthusiastic about buying something bigger and won't be enthusiastic about, replacing it with a big phone because maybe they don't want a big phone. Like maybe they're iPhone SE users. So now they have this role that's just not being filled and they're going to end up getting like a 7-inch Android tablet or something and be sad. So I await the iPad Mini's glorious comeback, even if it never actually goes away, because at this point it needs to come back, even though it's still for sale. They're selling one model that's really old for a crappy price. It needs to come back now. So if it wants to take a break and then come back, I'm fine. Or if they just want to, replace it at WWDC, I'm fine with that too.
I feel like almost all of this could have been said about the Mac Pro, and I don't mean that to be silly. I mean, it's a model that's kind of been on life support. They're kind of making sure everyone stops buying it because they won't update it. Like so much of this is, I don't know. I don't want to say it's becoming the Apple norm, but certainly we're seeing more than one data point of this strategy of just kind of making it fade into the distance.
It's more like the Mac Mini, because the role of the iPad Mini and the Mac, it's right there in the name. The role of both the iPad Mini and the Mac Mini is not to be the fastest, most awesome computer for its most demanding users. That's always a thorn in the side about the Mac Pro, is that particular role. Other devices, you could say, it's always been the most boring, least popular, with the least attention paid to it. That's not really true of the iPad Mini. When it came out, it was the darling. It's like, wow, they finally made a smaller tablet, and wow, look how well it's selling. And then the next, earnings call, like, wow, look at the iPad ASPs.
Yeah, I mean, and also, like, the iPad Mini competes now against areas in which Apple is doing worse and worse over time, namely very cheap tablets. It was always the budget option, the value option, the option that maybe you'd get for kids, and actually, and my kid, his iPad is a Mini, an old one that I had, collecting dust in a drawer for a while, and he loves it. It's great. Like, it's a really good kid size. So it is a nice size to offer. However, in the market for like smaller, ideally as cheap as possible tablets, Apple has not done well in a very long time, basically since there have been other tablets, besides the iPad, that were at all competitive. Now there are so many other options, and I think the market research has kind of supported this idea that there's basically two tablet markets. There's like tablets that are basically used as screens for video playback and not much else. And then there's like computing tablets that people use like for computing tasks and stuff like that. And the iPad does very well in the latter category. And if you restrict, what you're looking at to tablets priced above a certain level, maybe it's like priced above $300 or whatever, Apple does great by share in that market. But the total tablet market, most of the tablets being sold are these cheap ones that are being sold for very simple purposes where the OS and the quality of the tablet matter a lot less. And so Apple doesn't do well there. And the iPad mini might have served that role for a few years in the middle there before the rest of the world kind of caught up to that. But now anyone looking for a super cheap tablet for some embedded use or some kind of disposable use is not going iPad at all. They're going with something very cheap from Amazon or something. So I think maybe Apple decided to bow out of that market because it just isn't, it isn't, not only was it not profitable per unit for them maybe, but maybe in order to succeed at selling into that market at a very good rate, they would have to lower the price even further to the point where it's not even worth them competing at all. We are sponsored this week by Audible with an unmatched selection of audiobooks, original audio shows, news, comedy, and more. Get a free 30-day trial at audible.com/ATP. If you want to listen to something, Audible probably has it. Listen to audiobooks from virtually every genre, anytime, anywhere, and now also original audio shows with news, comedy, and more. You can play Audible's audiobooks and other content on phones, tablets, computers, and even a bunch of other kinds of devices too. Audiobooks are great for flights or long road trips or even just your daily life, your daily commute to and from work maybe, because you may think you don't have a lot of time to read books. But if you listen to audiobooks at these times in your life when you're like sitting in a car or walking or whatever, that time really adds up and you can burn through a lot more books per year than you might think if you do that every day. Audiobooks bring books to life. Many of them are even read by the authors themselves. And you can take risks and try new authors without regret because Audible offers their great listen guarantee. If you start an audiobook and don't like it, you can trade it for another one for free. So see and listen for yourself. When you begin a free 30-day trial, you get your first audiobook for free and there's no stress or obligation because you can cancel at any time. With audiobooks and all these wonderful spoken word audio products, you will find what you're looking for at Audible. Get a free 30-day trial by signing up at audible.com/ATP. That's audible.com/ATP. Thanks to Audible for sponsoring our show.
Speaking of other rumors, suddenly there's new laptops coming. And my favorite part of this is not only are there new laptops coming, but they're to take on Microsoft, which is kind of interesting. This is in Bloomberg by Mark Gurman and Alex Webb, and basically they're saying, well, Microsoft is really doing well these days with all their fancy new laptops and tablets and whatever they are, Surfaces. So maybe Apple will update some stuff after all, especially the MacBook, which would make me very happy. And interestingly, they're saying that this might happen at WWDC, which, I mean, certainly computers have been unveiled at WWDC, but it's not a terribly common occurrence. So I'm very intrigued by this. I'm super skeptical, but it would make me very happy, if nothing else, if I could finally buy a MacBook that I've wanted for like 6 months now.
So I think what we want out of revised MacBooks is more like what they hinted at the Mac Pro event, when people, the people who were there were asking, hey, what about the MacBooks? And were you surprised by the reaction to them? Blah, blah, blah. And they vaguely hinted that they're looking into the idea of making a new version of the MacBook Pros that is more satisfying to the people who are upset with the current ones for whatever reason. Obviously, they don't go into any details, but it makes everyone who's reading about that say, ooh, maybe they'll add more ports. Or, maybe they'll think about the touch bar some more. Or, if you're Casey, maybe they'll actually update the 12-inch MacBook to have faster insides because it totally needs them. And everyone's dreams just attached to the vague idea that they're going to revise them with, which of course they always do. Now, this rumor seems suspect on the whole to take on Microsoft angle because Microsoft may be introducing hardware that's causing people to write stories about it, but their Surface sales numbers are not particularly indicative of a world-conquering product line, at least not yet. And the things they're talking about, even in this rumor, seem like, I mean, fine, it's good speed bump, especially for the 12-inch MacBook, like that needs it. And the other ones, couldn't hurt. We all like speed bumps, like they're good. But it doesn't seem like in a WWDC timeframe they could have the newly rethought, revised, different in ways that will make people who didn't like the first ones happy about them sort of MacBook Pros. Like if you're expecting a new MacBook Pro with an SD card slot and maybe, more different ports on the other side of the thing to arrive at WWDC. That seems highly unlikely to me. There's also mixed in with this rumor the idea that they would update the 13-inch MacBook Air with new processors, which at this point, like, we all love speed bumps, and if you want to update the internals, that's fine, but you can't, like, they cannot update the MacBook Air again with leaving that screen. They just can't. It is an embarrassment. It's not even just that it's non-Retina, it's that it's non-Retina, and it's not even a good non-Retina screen, and has not been a good I don't think it was ever a good non-Retina screen, but it was acceptable for the price point at one point, but now it's just embarrassing. So
yeah,
if they want to update here's their problem. If they updated the internals of the 13-inch MacBook Air and put a Retina screen on it, it would suddenly become their best-selling portable again. And I don't know if Apple really wants that.
Oh, it's so true. I don't know, Marco, thoughts?
It's unlikely that people are going to get what they want, because it has been such a short time. Everyone has a wish list for what they wish the new MacBooks did, myself included, or, changes they wish for them. Ever since I switched to the Escape, I love the MacBook Escape so much in almost every way. But of course I have a wish list too. Like, my key, I got a stuck key the other day. My O key doesn't work anymore. And then I kind of jiggled it around and then started working again. So maybe there's something stuck under there. And I tweeted about it, and I heard from so many people who have had multiple keyboard failures. And the new keyboard, in addition to all of its other problems of having very low travel, being hard to feel, being very weirdly loud in a very unpleasant way, all the different problems the new keyboard has, the arrow keys being the way they are. Another problem that it seems like is possibly a pretty big problem with them is that they fail all the time. Like, it seems like this is a big thing. We heard from 12-inch MacBook owners for the last couple of years that it was a big problem on that. And it seems like whatever the revision was that they did to make it a little bit clickier and louder for the new MacBook Pros last year, it seems like that didn't get fixed. It seems like they still fail all the time.
I have a theory on this. Not having owned any one of these keyboards, but having seen the previous ones, I have a theory on what the failure mode might be, and maybe you can check your O key to see if this is the case. In addition to having less travel and having like a slightly different like activation mechanism underneath the keycaps, another thing that distinguishes, to my eyes anyway, the new crop of very low-profile keyboards on these portables is that the gap between the top case and the key is smaller than it used to be, which is great for like, this looks fancy and expensive and it's precision engineering to just cut out the hole just big enough for the keycap to slide up and down. But if anything manages to wiggle its way through that gap, A, it's not coming back out the way it came in because the gap is really, really small. And B, if it gets itself underneath the keycap to enough of a degree that it causes the thing not to activate. I've seen this exact problem with, my keyboard and the old laptop keyboards, the old Apple, flat keycap ones, because the gap was big enough for lots of junk to fall under there, but it was easier also to get it out even without prying the keycap off, and it would sort of jiggle loose. I'm wondering if the new ones are kind of like a one-way trap for like mice or whatever, that is a really, really skinny opening and small bits of like dust or food crumbs or whatever the heck else is floating around can get in there, but there's no way in hell they can get back out, and stuff builds up and it causes them to fail. That's just a theory. If people have failing keyboards and they say, no, it's actually the key switch, I don't know what the actual problem is, and I'm assuming you don't know either because all you're doing is kind of like poking at it like an ape and wiggling the O key. Oh, work now key. Okay, key work now. Like what can you do? I don't think, have you pried off the keycap yet?
I haven't, and I don't think you can on these. I'm pretty sure. I have to verify this. Maybe I'm sure people will email us.
iFixit it probably knows.
But I think somebody told me that with this new butterfly switch type that they use in these new keyboards, I'm pretty sure you can't actually pop them off for service or cleaning. And like whenever people say that, like when people were telling me all their stories on Twitter about getting these keyboards replaced. By the way, this laptop line has been out for 6 months or something, like 7 months. Like, it's not that long. So to have a whole bunch of keyboard failures this soon is not good.
Yeah, like it could be a design flaw. Like if it turns out that little gap is great for looking cool in photos but terrible for actual use, then that's your problem. And getting a new keyboard is not going to solve it. It's just going to reset your timer.
I mean, I would argue that's the failure mode of almost every decision on this keyboard. It's designed for product photos, but not good in actual use.
Some people like typing on it. Some people like it.
I mean, some people like Dell PCs. Some people like Dave Matthews Band.
Is there a quota? Is there a freaking quota at this point? What the hell is this? Anyway, yeah, I'm super skeptical of the timing. I'm super skeptical that Microsoft is the reason why.
Microsoft is definitely not the reason why. If they're going to change anything, it's going to be because of feedback from Apple's customers or performance of the sales that are maybe not doing what Apple wants them to do, or things like that. It's not going to be about what Microsoft is doing in their laptop line, because
because the 12-inch MacBook really needs an update. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other reason to do it. Well, it's been a kind of a long time.
Does Apple care about that, though? Really? I think they've shown that they mostly don't.
Maybe we're hoping that one of the lessons it learns from the Mac Pro fiasco is that if you want people to think that you care and to not be afraid to buy your computers and to not be angry when they buy them, that update them and there'll always be ones that are the least favorite child, like the Mac Mini or whatever. But the MacBook, the new MacBook, the MacBook One, the 12-inch MacBook, the MacBook Adorable, that's not supposed to be a forgotten child. That was one of your flagship, we're so excited, look at this amazing new thin computer. And then a couple of revisions later, it's 18 months, 2 years. Do we really need to update it that often? And that's bad. That's a bad look. Someone has to be the favorite child in that lineup, but it can't just be the MacBook Pros. And even those went a long time before the touch bars appeared.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's why I think if Apple's going to change anything else with the Kaby Lake revisions of these laptops, if they're going to make any other edits to the design, it's probably not going to be anything large. It's probably not going to be anything that would require new cases or anything like that. I think it's most likely to be price changes or new low-end configurations to hit new lower price points, because I think much of the criticism has correctly been about the increased prices of these new laptops compared to the old ones. And so if Apple just drops some prices a few $100 on a couple of models here and there, or makes a new low-end 15-inch that doesn't have the discrete GPU, and prices that
come up eventually. It's Marco's wishes. Just a 15-inch with real keys, but with Touch ID, but with no discrete GPU. That's the Marco computer.
A 15-inch Escape, basically, like that
with Touch ID. Don't forget.
Oh, that would be great, but I'm not holding my breath on that one yet. But I
feel like that's a change they could do I'm hoping that Touch ID proliferates, that it spreads across the Mac line slowly but surely, because it is like a universal good. As long as you can find a place somewhere to put it, who doesn't want that to authenticate and do all sorts of things? I think it would be very popular, just like it's popular on phones. But if it has to come with a touch bar, then suddenly at least Marco is less interested in it, and it's more difficult to implement. And so I'm hoping...
And it's more expensive.
I'm hoping a Touch ID on... Well, you have to end up putting the secure enclave and everything in there anyway. So once you have all that, it's we basically have the guts for the touch bar. Why don't we add it? But anyway, Touch ID spreading to the Escape lineup does not seem... out of the question for me. Unfortunately for you, Marco, I think the even more likely scenario is the Escape disappears as a touch bar proliferates across the entire line as it comes down in price and so on.
That is definitely a big risk to the Escape line, but I think it's more likely that it would just replace the MacBook Air eventually as the cheap one. And so they would keep this configuration around, basically just like the Air is now. They would update it occasionally, but probably not even as often as the rest of them. And they would push it slowly towards $1,000. Right now it starts at $1,500, so there's a long way to go.
It's the iPhone SE of the Mac laptop line.
Yeah, it really might be, honestly, because, again, it's an awesome computer. Really, my biggest complaint about it is that it's not a very good value, and then my second biggest complaint about it is the keyboard sucking. But other than those two things, it is quite awesome. And yeah, I would love another USB port. I would love an SD card reader, but those aren't massive problems for me. I think it's just a really nice computer. I really enjoy the MacBook Escape, and I enjoy it more and more the more I use it, which is the opposite direction my opinion took of the 15-inch Touch Bar model. I think that one of the more interesting questions is, what do they do with the Touch Bar? Because I think it's pretty clear by this point. Now we've had 7 months or whatever. We've had enough time for everyone's keyboards to die. So I think it's enough time to judge the Touch Bar a little more objectively than when it first came out. And I've heard a few other podcasts talking so hey, how are you using the Touch Bar these days? Are you getting into it? What do you think of it now? And the universal opinion from nearly everybody seems to be either negative or kind of middling. I haven't heard from anybody who loves the touch bar. I haven't heard from anybody who's like, man, I use it all the time. I'm so glad of all the new capabilities it offers or whatever else. Like, I haven't heard of any interesting app uses for it. And I think it'll be interesting to see what Apple does with that. Because I think they've kind of felt this too, that the touch bar did not land as well as they hoped it would. Will we see more options in the future, such as a 15-inch escape? More options without the touch bar for people who don't want the touch bar itself or don't want to pay the premium for it? Or will Apple kind of double down on it and kind of force it into the market as much as possible, even more so than they do now, and eliminate all the options that don't have it anymore?
I think it's way too soon to judge the success of the touch bar, in no small part because for a lot of people, they often don't buy laptops for themselves. They just use whatever laptop work issues them. And I can assure you that most workplaces that I've ever worked are on 2 to 3 year refresh cycles. And a lot of workplaces aren't really buying touch bars yet, in part because they don't have to. And so I think I would say it's not worth judging the touch bar as a success or a failure for at least another year, if not another 2 years. So for me, this job and the last job I was at, I was on a 3-year cycle. So every 3 years I get a new computer, which means I'm not getting a new computer for 2 more years. And I've been at my job over a year now. So I mean, we are 2 years removed from me getting a new computer, which if history tells us anything, it means I'll be getting the exact touch bar model that's out right now. But you see what I'm driving at. It's a long time for a lot of people to get into the touch bar. I think we're judging it way prematurely.
Well, one of the things, my work made some judgment on the touch bar model because I am due to get a new computer, but my work refuses to buy the touch bar models because they perceive them to not be a good enough value upgrade over the old one. So at work, I have, I guess it's the 2015 MacBook Pro, whatever. I don't know the specific model that I have, but anyway, the pre-touch bar MacBook Pros.
Does it have a force-click trackpad?
Yeah.
Then it's
I'm wondering if I have a 2015, was that literally the last one before the touch bar?
If it's a 15-inch and if it has force touch, then it's 2015.
Yep, that's what I have. And I think that's what you probably have too, John.
Yeah, but anyway, this is not just a company saying, oh, we're on this upgrade cycle and we're not thinking about buying one. It's like, I was waiting to get the touch bar ones. Like, well, the touch bar ones are out, and you have no more laptops in stock, so you're going to have to buy a new one. And when you buy a new one, like, obviously you're going to buy the touch bar ones. And they were like, no,
they still sell the old ones.
We're not buying the touch bar ones. Why not? Well, they're expensive and get worse battery life and blah, 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 blah. And so, like, that's a judgment call. They're not making it based on the touch bar. The company's deciding that these are not better enough and are worse in enough ways that they don't want to deal with it. Now, eventually they'll have to if this touch bar spreads everywhere, eventually they'll have to buy them because they'll have no choice. But that is not I'm sure Apple doesn't like the idea that a corporation decided not to buy the new laptops and continues to buy the old ones. I mean, maybe that happens all the time in enterprise. I don't know. Meanwhile, my computer at work is 8 years old. It's a great pairing with my home computer.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, I think Apple could solve a lot of this need by just making a couple of low-end configurations and making them cheaper. And then that would get people like your company to at least get their foot in the door for new upgrades in the new line, because now instead of starting at 2,300 or whatever it starts at, now it might start at 1,900 or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. It's just such a hard thing, but the only thing I feel like I know for sure is that it's way too early to judge, and we need a little time to kind of figure out whether or not this is for real. And I think one way for Apple to compel adoption or to compel people to take the touch bar more seriously, well, I guess 2 ways. One is to make them cheaper or a better value by whatever metric that may be, and 2 is to just force it across the entire line. I don't know. We'll see. It'd be cool to have some hardware at WWDC, though. That'd be neat. I doubt it'll happen, but it'll be neat. It would be neat.
One thing that Marco can be optimistic about, by the way, speaking of his complaints with laptops, is that Apple has shown that it is willing to revise the new weird keyboard that he hates, because it was released on one model of computer, and then when the new MacBook Pros came out, one of the things that was emphasized was that they had made a revision to what appears to be the same keyboard, presumably in response to people using the MacBook One and not being happy with the keyboard. Now, this has a different set of problems of being noisy, and maybe they both have the problem of the keys dying or whatever. But I was encouraged by the fact that they didn't say, well, let's just ship this keyboard for 5 more years and see how things work out. They immediately revised it and attempted to improve it. And so it's not inconceivable that the next major revision, maybe not this kind of speed bumpy thing, but the next major revision of the laptop line will have yet a third iteration of the keyboard Margot hates, which presumably will make a different set of trade-offs and maybe be better overall. So that's something to watch for and potentially look forward to.
I mean, it's possible. I just think that, they went into the original MacBook 12-inch one, baby, whatever, keyboard design, and the goal of that was make this keyboard as thin as humans will tolerate. And they did, and they made other design decisions around that, but that was like the invariant. You could not, number one had to be thin, and all other parts of its usability were, numbers 2 through N. And with this, I think when they carried this over into the entire MacBook Pro line, I think that invariant held. I think that was, again, it's like, you can do whatever else you want to it, but it must remain super thin. Again, at all other costs. Make it less reliable, make us spend a fortune on warranty repairs, make people hate this keyboard at a large scale.
Well, I don't think the reliability was a factor. Reliability may have been a result of that, but I don't think they factored in. I think they expected the reliability to be about the same as the old ones, and only they know for sure whether it really is, how big the scope of the problem is. But I don't think they traded the reliability. It just turned out perhaps to be, oh, surprise, you made that trade-off and you didn't realize it when you made the gaps really tight, which really has nothing to do with the thinness, because that's like lateral width and stuff. Like, they could have made the gaps around the keys, change the size of the keycaps and make the gaps bigger. It wouldn't have looked as nice. It's almost like a design decision as an aesthetic design more than it is a functionality decision, because that gap has no influence on, again, assuming that gap has anything to do with this problem. For all we know, it's something entirely unrelated. But if it is that gap, they can fix that while keeping all the thinness benefits.
Right. But anyways, the point is, thinness was number one priority. Everything else was secondary to thinness. And so it's like when they made the revision between the 12-inch original keyboard and the new MacBook Pro keyboard, they said, okay, we can improve these other areas, but you cannot make it thicker. Whatever you do, we are using this keyboard, damn it, and just make it tolerable a little bit more if you can.
You know how they love to use the same keyboard everywhere.
I don't expect any revisions of this computer to make the keyboard significantly better, because I think, I'm not a keyboard engineer, but just seeing like the performance of this, the original MacBook One, and every other keyboard in the world, I think in order to make it better, in order to fix the problems with it, they're probably going to have to go back to a scissor switch instead of these weird butterfly switches. And I don't think you can get scissor switches that are this thin that are any good. I think that's the reason they went to this switch in the first place. So I don't think they're able to fix this keyboard's biggest shortcomings without making it thicker, which is something that I just think there is no way that modern Apple would ever ship a laptop that was thicker than the one that came before it, even if it made it a lot better in a lot of different ways. I don't see that happening.
They could change the switching mechanism underneath it yet again, because that's what they did with the thing. They revised the little switchy thingy, like to have different feel and different sound, as it turns out. They could revise that little switchy thing again, keeping it the same size to try to find a different balance. Again, maybe that will or won't help reliability depending on what the heck the problem is, or if it really is, how big the problem is at all. But if you wait long enough, it'll be as we talked about when the Touch Bar first came out. The other possibility is that Touch Bar slowly expands to fill the entire bottom of your screen, and now you've just got 2 screens that close like a clamshell, and you don't have to worry about key travel anymore.
The MacBook DS.
Yep.
Wow. I don't know. I it's hard to say what's going on in Apple. And Marco, it almost sounded as though, and I think I am taking this a half step further than you intended, but it almost sounds as though you're attributing this to like malice or just unbelievable hubris. And maybe you're right. Who knows? But I think if I were to wager a guess, I think what's really happening is Apple is saying, hey, lighter computers and thinner computers as well. Let's leave lighter out of it. I shouldn't have brought that up. Thinner computers, generally speaking, are better for everyone. I would like a thinner computer. Now, granted, I may not want to make a bunch of the trade-offs necessary to get it thinner. But if you said to me, You don't have to make any trade-offs, but would you like your computer thinner? Well, yes. Yes, I would. And everyone likes thinner computers. Part of the reason I want this MacBook so bad is because it's so portable and so thin. And I don't know. I don't think it's that they're like, screw it, this is the new design. And if anyone else doesn't like it, tough noogies for them. It's just, I think that they're marching toward as thin and as light a laptop as they can possibly get. And one of the things that stands in their way in making that is these big switches that they've used classically. And so now they have these new switches that they're trying, and they'll iterate on it and they'll make it better. But obviously there are trade-offs. And I don't know, I haven't used one of these new laptops with these new switches, but I haven't used them for a long period of time, but the brief times I've used it, I didn't find them that offensive. And I think that all the nerds, the same kinds of nerds that often, but not always, like mechanical keyboards, all them kvetching and whining about the feel of this keyboard. Yeah, okay, that's to be expected. But I cannot remember a single time I've spoken to someone that's in the quote unquote real world that has been so upset about this keyboard. I'm sure those people exist, but I certainly personally have never noticed that. And I would think it would make the rounds as like, oh, these Apple keyboards are garbage. Everyone agrees, if they really were that bad.
Well, it's, again, I want to be clear. I first of all, I don't think this is malice. I think this is bad design decisions, or bad design priorities. It's not that everyone hates the new keyboard. Maybe even most people can tolerate it. My dislike of it, I'll try to be brief because we talked about this so often, but my dislike of it, I think, boils down to that it's an unforced error. That they have taken this, what used to be fairly ignorable. Like, no one talked about the keyboards on Apple laptops for years. It was just never a thing that mattered because every laptop had a keyboard that was pretty good and it was fine, and no one cared. And once the MacBook 12-inch one baby came out, then now all of a sudden there's this extremely controversial keyboard that a lot of people are okay with, but a lot of people were like, "Oh my god, I hate this," And so they took something that was not controversial and made an extreme version of it that was very controversial. And that was probably okay if it was only ever on that model, but now it's on, and which was the assumption that we all had when it came out. But now it's on all the key. Now it's basically the same keyboard everywhere. Now it's on every laptop that you buy that is new, that has been updated in the last 20 years. Now has this keyboard on it, and so it's like now there's no more choice. This extreme polarizing thing that in this category that used to not be polarizing. Now this is your only choice. So if you want to keep buying modern Mac laptops, you now have to accept this keyboard, whether you like it or not. And there's a lot of people who don't. So it's and nobody was really begging for the previous generation of laptops to get thinner. They do love lighter, and thinner does feel great in the store and sell well. But there's also a balance to be struck with, like, how many people find this appealing? Do people make more errors? Does it break more often? Because you know what? Here's the thing. Like, Apple might not care about the warranty costs so far of replacing all these dying keycaps and dead keyboards on all these laptops. But you know what? I, as a user, care quite a bit. I have bought something like, 10 Apple laptops in my life so far. Something in that ballpark. I've never had a key problem. I've never had a key break. That seems ridiculous to me. And now I have this MacBook Escape that's like 2 months old, and I already have a key problem. And so even if Apple fixes it for free, which they damn well will, I still have to now go get it serviced. I have to be without it for a certain amount of time. I have to go through the process of getting it serviced, which is its own pain now with Apple because they're so crowded now with everything. And so I, as a user, I feel like I've bought this fragile thing. Now I'm thinking, I should probably buy AppleCare on this, another $300 or whatever it is, because if it's going to be this fragile and have a key break after very light use for 2 months, that's, obviously this is not a well-built machine. And so, and all of this is an unforced error because they didn't have to make the machines this thin. They could have just made them this light and made them almost this thin and given an extra millimeter or whatever it would have been to have a less controversial, more durable keyboard in there. But they didn't. And they made that choice now for the entire product line. So if you disagree with that choice, you now have no more options.
I'd like to respond to that very quickly in two ways. One, you said unforced error, which is a sports reference, and I don't think we appropriately congratulated you for that, so well done.
I actually didn't know that. I've only heard John say it.
Oh, God.
He's copying me. Well, can you guess which sport it's from then, since you heard me say it?
I know baseball has errors, so I'm going to say baseball.
No, good try.
No, is it exceptions in baseball?
Tennis. Tennis, come on. One sport I know stuff about.
It's an exception. The other thing I want to say is, you've said a couple times, Marco, that not a lot of people seem to care about thinness, or why would people care about thinness? I disagree. I think thinness really matters.
Well, no, I didn't say that. I said it does sell well. It feels great in stores and it sells well, but ultimately weight is much more important. And the laptops were already really thin before. So people weren't crying out.
Yeah, see, but weight's more important to you. If I carried a purse every day, thinness would be pretty darn important to me. I don't think that... I think you're underselling the importance of thinness. I do agree fully. I completely and utterly agree that weight is more important. But I think a lot of times, or I would wager a lot of times, that people conflate weight with thinness. And especially if you're carrying something a lot. It's not just going in like a backpack. It's not just going, in a laptop bag. You're carrying it like on your person a lot, like in a purse, or in the same way you would carry an iPad. That's exactly why I want the MacBook. In many ways, I want the MacBook not only because it's light, but also expressly because it's so thin, because it feels like nothing. That's why the Air was so cool the very first time we saw it, because it fit in that damn envelope that Steve had. I think, for maybe not for you and maybe not for everyone, but for a lot of people, I think thinness is certainly important.
Yeah, it is, but we're talking about such small numbers. Like we're talking about like single millimeters or fractional millimeters, and it's like, yes, thickness and thinness do matter, but as the absolute values of these numbers get smaller and smaller, the relative differences matter a lot less, because we're talking about like every laptop that Apple sells is ridiculously thin. Every laptop Apple sold before these came out, the entire 2012 Retina generation, was also really thin. And the MacBook Air generation before that, also really thin. Like, Apple doesn't really sell a thick computer anymore.
Right, but that's a competitive advantage.
Yeah, but I'm saying, you're talking about the difference between... It's literally talking about the difference of like a millimeter for different keyboard types. Like, that's the scale of what we're talking about here. So I don't think... And look at the 11-inch Air before this. The 11-inch Air had a regular scissor switch keyboard. And it was a really small, thin computer that is of similar dimensions, although, again, slightly larger, as the 12-inch MacBook. But it was still, it was really close to those dimensions and that thickness. And so, I just don't think they needed to make this decision for the entire lineup, and that has consequences. And what I'm saying is it was a poor design decision to go with this extreme polarizing option when going with something that was a little more mainstream acceptable, like your beloved Magic Keyboard 3 or whatever it is, like the current Magic Keyboard.
Yeah.
That has scissor switches. And if they put that in the laptop, that would be great.
Wait, I thought it didn't. I thought it didn't have... Okay,
no,
so
it
I
does.
originally thought it... Okay, so I almost said that, and then I could have sworn I was wrong. So, okay, then I agree with you. If this thing was in a laptop, oh my God, I would be in heaven.
Right, but they didn't do that. And to do that would not have made the laptops that much thicker. It would have been a really small difference in thickness. It would have been probably zero noticeable difference in weight, because keyboards are mostly empty space. They're pretty light. So it would only have made it a little bit thicker, probably. But they didn't do that, because they made this decision for everybody now that I think was a bad decision. But that's it. We don't need to keep talking about this if we don't want to.
You're losing sight of the real crime, the real multi-decade crime, which is using the same keyboard no matter how big the laptop is. You have all this room for other keys, but they just cannot handle the asymmetry. They just cannot handle it. They can't give us an inverted T at home and end, and nope, they just not gonna happen. Same keyboard, exact same keyboard, constrained to its little rectangle, no matter how big, how much aluminum there is around it, just sitting there with tiny little holes that look like speaker grills but aren't really. That is the real crime, and that is a multi-generational, multi-decade crime instead of this very recent, really shallow key travel thing.
Real quick, real-time follow-up. The 13-inch MacBook Pro, I think I'm looking at the 13. One of the MacBook Pros, doesn't matter, is 1.49 centimeters height. The MacBook is a maximum of 1.31 centimeters height. So that's a difference of, what is that, 18 millimeters? Is that right? I can do math. It's late. I don't know. But it's not that much, to your point, Marco.
1.8.
It's certainly... Yeah, that too. Whatever. Anyway, point is, it's not a lot, no matter how you slice it, and that is absolutely true. But one of the benefits of this march to thinness is that a person who maybe always carries their computer with them, be it somebody with a purse or somebody who just always has a laptop bag on them, maybe they always have to have a computer with them, and for whatever reason, and they might have been forced to, in the past, use either the underpowered MacBook or the slightly less underpowered MacBook Air. Now, because of Apple's general march of thinness and toward thinness, now they can, to your point, Marco, use a MacBook Pro, because really the delta isn't that big in the grand scheme of things. So, again, I think thinness does matter to everyone in ways that may not be obvious, even though I completely and utterly agree. I'll say it again, that weight is the ultimate number one issue.
In better real-time follow-up, chat room user Jobius says, baseball errors are not called exceptions, even though they are a failure that occurs in the try-catch block.
Well done.
Thanks to our 3 sponsors this week, Betterment, Audible, and Fracture. And we will see you next week.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech podcast so long.
I'm excited for WWDC. It's going to be weird this year. It's going to be super weird being in a new place.
Yeah, it's going to be really weird, but I'm also really excited about it because, A, it's new, it's different. B, we're doing a live show, and I'm super excited about that. I got to buy a whole bunch of cool stuff to do it. So
that's not why I'm excited, but I am still excited.
And C, if any of the rumors are correct about either hardware or software, it's going to be a big one. And I'm looking forward to that. I'm excited, As much as I seem skeptical of a lot of things that Apple does in recent times, they also do a whole bunch of stuff I'm really excited about. And this is one of the biggest events of the year. I would say probably the second biggest. I think the biggest is probably like the fall event where they announce new iPhones and stuff. But this is probably the second biggest event of the year. And lots of stuff is gonna probably be mentioned that's gonna be really cool, and I'm just looking forward to that. We might even, like Tipster says, we might even get the new Mac Pro teased. Who knows if that's the case? But I'm just really excited about whatever it is, because like even if they only deliver on like a quarter of the rumored things, that's still gonna be really cool.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I will be incredibly surprised if there is anything that they could even tease about for the Mac Pro, like even like a logo with words on it, like just not even like a glimpse of the computer or anything about it. But I would be surprised that they even had time to do that. It just seems like they maybe wouldn't want to remind us about that fiasco at this time, especially if they have tons of other stuff to announce. So I'm not looking forward to that. The thing I'm most looking forward to is hopefully improved weather. Because I'm always tired of like being cold in June is just not right. And it's the kind of weather where it's not really cold, so you don't bring like your warm clothes, but then like suddenly you're out and it's like 1 a.m. and you're freezing. And you're like, why? Isn't this June? I hate that.
Well, that's why they always give everybody jackets at WWDC, because like
those jackets are the cruelest jackets, because they're like, oh, this jacket, like you'll be baking in the sun in the middle of the day in that jacket, but if you wear that jacket all night, you will eventually be freezing in it. So it's a cruel jacket.
Oh yeah, I have a whole stack of them in my closet that I just never wear because it's always either too sweaty or too uninsulated for whatever condition I'm in.
Or it has no pockets like that one year.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about this Stephen Levy new campus, Apple Park thing?
I didn't read that yet. Although I opened it and I scrolled the page and I went, ugh, one of those.
I mean, here's the thing. Like, I don't really care about Apple's office building. I think it's cool that they do stuff like this, that they put so much thought into it, but I think it's also arguable, based on some of the reporting coming out of this, that maybe this was a massive distraction for them, and especially for people like Johnny Ive. And maybe it's better that Johnny Ive was busy doing this instead of making our keyboards even worse, but I don't know. Or making our Mac Pros even less useful. But it is certainly arguable that this has been a massive distraction for a lot of top people at Apple. But other than that, I don't really care about the details, because I'm probably never going to be allowed inside the giant ring, and I'm probably never going to work there, so I don't think it's ever really going to affect me.
It'll be a great place to probably settle in the end times, if you're able to secure that facility and protect it from the zombies and the chuds, because it'll be like fairly self-sustaining and probably have like nice views and be secure and look kind of cool. So I look forward to that being a good apocalypse bunker.
You know, it's interesting. Having read the article, I do think it's worth reading. But what I found interesting about it was that you can read it two ways, right? You can read it as this is the epitome of Apple taking things seriously. They're just taking the stuff seriously. Even stuff like the handles on the doors they take seriously, and it matters to them. And that's just admirable and respectable, how seriously they take even the most minute stuff. Or,
well, there's a line between admirable, respectable, and pathological. That's, I think, the line.
That's exactly where I was going with this. Or you can say, this is just freaking crazy pants, that they are going this deep on these stupid decisions that really don't matter. Like, I
don't think it's the fact that they matter or not. Like, oh, you shouldn't be worried about that. Here, I think it turns on the sort of anti-pattern that you see with a lot of these fancy buildings. They should care about these things, and they should care about all the details. And I think it is not like beneath their level of concern because it's just a doorknob. I think the problem is, from my perspective anyway, that Apple doesn't have a lot of experience building buildings. And when you go from one domain where you're building like computer hardware or things related to that and go into another domain and say, just because we care a lot and we have a lot of money, we will be able to produce a building that fulfills our desires, but also functions in a way that fits with that. And like one of the best examples is like the Stata Center at MIT. It's what's his name? Frank Gehry or whatever, the guy who makes those buildings look like they're falling down. If you just Google for it, you'll see the picture of it. And it's very strange and interesting looking from the outside, and it is also strange from the inside. And regardless of what you think of the aesthetics and the style and the statement that it's making, as a building, because of those design decisions, which were probably expensive to have him do, and all these non-rectilinear walls and all this weird stuff, it fails in some of the basic functions of buildings. Like, for example, sight lines from certain places where you can see downwards into a bathroom on another floor. That's failing as a building. Doors with motion sensor things, which because of the way everything's are connected, it's possible to trip them and open a supposedly secure door because there are gaps or other things that allow the motion sensor to be triggered. Like, it's failing as a building. So when I see Apple spending all this money on tables and doorknobs and stuff like that, I don't think it's because those things are below the level of concern they shouldn't worry about and they should just accept it. I have little faith that no matter how much money and you know, especially if it's a Johnny Ive type thing and style they put into this design, that it's not going to work as well as a building if you had just taken the standard contractor office door, because the standard contractor office doors have had years and years to be honed. Like, this is the right balance between reliability and cost, over time. This door is going to work. The knob is going to work. It's going to fulfill the function. It's going to last you 5-10 years and you won't have to replace it, as opposed to this beautiful artisanal door handle that you've designed that no one else has installed, that, like Marco's keyboard, 6 months later, like, the doors aren't working anymore. And that's what, the Stata Center is the like a flagship for that, because like you spend all this money and all this time and all this prestige of this fancy architecture to this thing, and it fails as a building. Someone in the chat room says it also leaks.
Nice.
you're and a lot of the Frank Lloyd Wright office buildings were like that too. The big lily pad thing, like leaks and stuff. It's like this office building looks really cool and has all these great architectural aspects, but if it doesn't keep the rain out, that seems pretty important. And I don't think that's a smart trade-off to make. Now, it could be that Apple has spent all this time and money and actually has gotten all these things right. But in every area where they innovate, quote, in every area where they do something different than every other office building, if it hasn't been done a million times before by other people's office buildings, I worry about it. In the same way that it was a no-brainer to predict problems with the Tesla Model X's Gullwing or Eagle Wing or whatever they are, Falcon Wing doors, it was a no-brainer to predict there would be problems with that because that's not how every other car door in the world is made, and you're not going to get it right on your first try. It seems to me that if Apple is doing anything in this building that hasn't been done many, many times before, but is being done for the very first time in this building, those things are going to have problems, and that's probably not a good trade-off. Now, it's possible that they pulled it off, and this building is like the iPhone, where like they just nailed it. Like they did an amazing new thing, and they got so much right about it that it overwhelms any possible problems that it has, and will it'll be great. But it's also possible this will be a beautiful round status center.